Welcome to the Stay Grounded podcast, brought to you by Java Press Coffee Company. My name is Raj Jana, and I'm the Chief Brewing Officer here at Java Press, where we help people make daily happiness a priority using the coffee we love. I interview people from all walks of life to discuss happiness, success, fulfillment, and ways to infuse it all into daily life. I want to dissect different thought processes and turn them into powerful insights that empower you to stay grounded and make daily happiness and fulfillment a reality. So thanks for joining me today. Now, let's get to grinding. Welcome to episode 39 of the Stay Grounded podcast. Hope you're all having an amazing day. This week's guest is a friend of mine and an incredibly enlightened soul, Dr. Steve Young. So Steve I had listened to him talk at a recent conference, and I immediately was drawn to the title of his presentation, which was Loving Your Way to 150 Years Old. So Steve is a functional medicine doctor whose moonshot goal is to help 1 billion people love their way to building their greatest legacy by providing the tools and systems for success. So he really has developed a holistic healing system that, and this is beyond a diet or beyond a way of life or beyond a yes and no list. He's created almost a framework for just approaching food, approaching goals, exercise, and just everything you do in your life with a lens that allows you to make the most of any type of lifestyle you're really wanting to experience. And so that was one of the most profound talks I had been to all year. And so I had to have him on the show, and I am just so grateful for everything he shared on this episode, because I walked away. I mean, my notes were just running rampant, walking away with some of the insights that he was sharing about your relationship with food and the way that you can almost hack discipline and willpower and just find a way to live life beyond what the media is telling you to do, or just the yes and no culture that we've sort of adopted over the past several decades. So Steve is an incredible human being. He's got, if you want to learn more about Steve and everything he's up to, drsteveyoung.com. He's got a wealth of information on just how to infuse more health and happiness into your day-to-day life in a way that you want to do. So anyways, check him out, get in touch with him, do whatever you need to do, and just enjoy this episode, because I sure did. Before we get started, don't forget, subscribe, rate, review the podcast on iTunes. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, and just get in touch. Be a part of the community and give feedback, because I do read every single review that comes in, and I do everything I can to change and grow and morph the podcast to be something that you guys want. So anyways, hope you guys enjoy this episode. So without further ado, here's Dr. Steve Young. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Stay Grounded podcast. Oh man, super excited. God, I'm so pumped. Steve, my man, how are you?
Woo, doing well.
Oh my gosh. So just to give everybody a little bit of context, I heard I've known Steve for a while, but I really got exposed to his brilliance when I was at an event recently where he shared one of the most insightful conversations and insights that I've heard in a very long time. And so after I heard that, I had to ask Steve to make some time in his day to spend time with us. And here he is. So Steve, just grateful to have you here, man.
Yeah, super excited to be able to share sort of some of my passions with your amazing audience.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive in. So I already introduced you in a nutshell before the show started, but so I want to dive into actually one of the bigger questions that I had when I was doing my due diligence on you, and that's about your moonshot goal. It's a pretty crazy vision or goal for any one human being to have. I'm curious, how did you land on this? What is the path that you took to come to where you are right now, where this is what you want to share with the world? And Sure. How did that become a part of your story?
Yeah. In general, I call it the following the magical breadcrumbs from the universe, right? So it wasn't like when I was a young kid, I was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. What I did know from a young age, around 14, is that's when I started looking into like personal development stuff, right? And so that started this whole journey of like learning how to think like effective thinkers, right? And so, but when I was younger, it wasn't like, hey, I'm gonna help 1 billion people be healthy. I was just still exploring, like any teenager, like what we're going to be passionate about. But I was always passionate about like just fitness stuff, right? So like working out and healthy things. And so it was just this constant, twist and turn journey where at first I was like a personal trainer. Then I kind of realized I wanted to do more than just like, helping people look sexy when they're naked, right? and then that kind of evolved into, well, let me look into and explore healing. And so then I went into physical therapy and became a physical therapist. And then in that time, I was really into supplements. And so I used to custom make certain supplements for people. And then they were like, hey, why don't you get a manufacturer to make it instead of you in your kitchen, like mixing a bunch of, magical powders. That started the company. A year into being a physical therapist, the person I worked for was like, hey, let's partner up and start. I was like, yes. And so I just basically said yes to everything and just kind of figured it out from there. And some things worked and some things didn't. And so in my journey of healing people, what really magnified the, from like 1 million to 1 billion, basically. So I, had this goal when I was young to, instead of making $1 million, I had this goal of like being able to write a check for $1 million and give it to charity. Right? Because I felt like that was just more selfless than just making $1 million. And what really turned into from that to like helping 1 billion people was when I spent time with Branson on Necker Island. Yeah, that was definitely a turning point. Just kind of seeing how 26 of us in 3 hours like solved world problems, almost not effortlessly, but almost effortlessly, just kind of through discussions. And it wasn't like, oh my God, we're stressed. How do we do this? Like everyone just kind of gave their input. And so that experience really helped shift my mindset into, wow, like if you just work with amazing people, helping 1 billion isn't as crazy as it sounds. And so that was sort of like the journey towards that.
That's a beautiful journey. I love that you broke it back down to, I just said yes to everything, because that's such a simple concept that actually every one of us can practice and implement immediately in our lives. Now I want to go back to your kind of when you first got into fitness. Was there a turning point or an experience that you remember at some point in your life where you went from wanting to do to make people look sexy to wanting to heal them? Was there, because like when I think about things that drive me, like they're always rooted in some sort of like turning point. Was there a turning point for you?
Yeah. I think, so like two different experiences kind of intersected to cause this turning point. Right. And so one was, I was just learning enough about the body where I felt like I could do more with this information than simply helping people like design their workouts and their diet plans. The other was just by then I was already like reading mindset stuff for about 6 years at that point. So what I started to notice in the fitness industry was that the implied message, like in many industries, is that you're fat and ugly now unless you do my program. So that was such a turnoff for me that I really just wanted to kind of get out of that industry, Right. And so I just felt like so many people were coming to me already brainwashed with that message. Like, I am just not good enough unless I lose my 5 pounds, unless I can bench 50 pounds more, unless they were just chasing that internal carrot. And I felt like I was in a way perpetuating that. Right. And so I really started to like, how do I just shift to healing instead of, helping them chase that carrot. And it was really 10 years after in the healing phase. And I kind of discovered, how do we help people out of that mindset? And so, yeah.
I think that's a great segue, because I've been curious, when you say healing, are you healing the body? Or are you healing the mind, the spirit? And in what combination are all three of those sort of playing together to create really this abundant lifestyle that you're advocating for?
Yeah. So at first, of course, it was just, we'll call it physical or mechanical healing, right? As a physical therapist, we work with muscles, tendons, and joints and bones and things. And again, from doing that, I've been doing this 20 years, right? And so like the first 10 years was purely mechanical. And like, I used to obsess, like I used to have dreams of me treating patients. Like I was like, healing in my sleep, right? So read all kinds of research. And eventually once you, like anything, once you sort of learn a lot about that topic, I mean, at least for me, it almost felt like I needed to know more, like how do I heal or help people deeper? And also it helped keep it more interesting, right? I tell patients all the time, if you're here simply for me to do the mechanical stuff, it is deathly boring, right? Because I usually tell people, like, I can just write it on a piece of paper, follow this, and in 8 weeks, like you're going to feel better. And so around 10 years into it was when I started to look at, okay, how do we heal people completely, which is what I call it, right? So like holistically, right? How do we add in the emotional aspect, the energetic aspect, and even the chemical aspect, right? Because a human body is made from, the physical self, which is comprised of our mechanical parts, but also there's the chemical self, right? Like our neurotransmitters and all the foods that we're eating that affects our chemicals. And then there's this whole, world of energy, spiritual stuff that affects the human. Yeah. And so eventually we did these healing retreats. I had this experiment. I was like, what if we got people who are like the best chemical experts, the best mechanical experts, and the best, we'll call it energy, emotional, spiritual experts. And we actually did all three at once on a human. What would the effects of that be? And what we found, it was like miracles happen. Like people who couldn't walked in 2 hours. It was pretty
wow.
Yeah.
So, okay, talk me through that. So now you're combining all three parts of the human experience and you're healing all three of those at the same time. How do you know which one had a greater effect over the other when you're doing all of that at the same time?
Yep, for sure. In the beginning, so this was 3.5 years ago. In the beginning, when it was just an experiment, right? I treat life as like, say yes, figure it out. And then as a scientist, let's just look at the data to see what happens. It's kind of exciting. So in the beginning, we didn't know, right? It was like the shotgun approach. Like, let's do maximum chemical healing. We had as people were learning about mindset stuff, they were getting IV drips of nutrients into their body as they're learning the mindset stuff, right? And then afterwards, we would treat them mechanically and work on their muscles and align their bodies. We didn't know. We basically threw everything at them and we just saw these miracle things happen, right? And so anything from literally a person with nerve damage who, when he stood up, he had to hold on to furniture because he couldn't feel his legs. Literally 2 hours later, stood up normally. And we have amazing before and after videos.
Wow.
So from that kind of mechanical miracle to psychological miracle, we had a kid that came and I shared a cab ride with him to the airport leaving the event. And he was crying as he was telling me, for the first time, I feel like something in my life is possible. Right. And so major, psychological, emotional breakthroughs. And at that point, I couldn't identify what was needed most because we just kind of gave everything to the people. So, but flash forward 3.5 years later, from playing in that space, to answer your question, how do we know? There's an intuitive sense. The best way to put it. A lot of times from tapping and practicing, we all have this ability of heightened intuition. Our reality is so much more than the 5 senses that we have. And so all humans can practice this sense of intuition and sense people's energies and use that data to discern what is needed most. I just read this amazing book that was given to me by Cheryl, shaman that we know. And so in shamanism, they're trained to, they work with energy and they can literally sense people's energies and see how do we affect the person's energy to heal their bodies. It's fascinating. There's this whole other world.
I mean, I love the idea of manufacturing miracles, which I think is it's such a taboo concept that's not really talked about enough. So if you have a heightened sense of intuition and you learn to sort of sense what's happening around you, how do you start manufacturing miracles in your own life? What's the starting steps for someone to just start manufacturing, whether you want to call it luck or it's just more of what you want? I mean, how do you get down the path of consciously just bringing miracles into your life?
I've meditated on this for 20 years. So it's interesting. So we're all taught in Western society to be goal driven. Right? And typically it's SMART goals, simple, measurable, time frame, realistic goals. However, being very focused and goal driven is like a horse with blinders on. Like they're going to get from A to B, but as they're running from A to B on that track, they're not noticing, wow, there's the girl with a pretty red hat there. Oh, wow, this other horse next to me is actually sweating more than I am. Who knows? And so I call it, you want to have goals, but you also want to practice taking off your blinders and being open to what I call magic, right? And so, because on your way there, what if, we call it God, we call it universe, whatever, spirits, many names for it. What if they are all knowing and they have an idea that this path for you that you have chosen may actually, even though you want it really badly, may not be the best path for your fulfillment, your happiness, right? You can call it destiny. And they're literally constantly dangling these little signs next to you in your peripheral vision. But if you're very focused, you won't see it in your peripheral vision because you're so focused on the goal, right? So that's the way I experience reality. And what I find is that you want to have these goals. Part of the process of removing the blinders is being detached from the outcome of the goal, right? And so you kind of read about this a lot. Right? It's like having the goal, but detach from the outcome and be open to the periphery, I call it. These, if you start to notice those, for many of us, there are some repeated hints of things, repeated patterns. And those are little signs, again, spirit, God, soul, many names for it, are trying to tell you something. And so you get to recognize those patterns and see, just, journal with yourself, write down, like, what is this? What is God, universe trying to reveal that is in my best interest, and just see what comes up.
Now, when you say, okay, so let's say now I've started being more aware of the periphery. Are you suggesting that miracles are then experiences that happen outside of what you're expecting? Like, so the miracles are really the periphery, like whatever comes in your periphery and saying yes to that becomes the miracle.
For sure. Right. Because if you think about it, if you have a goal and you achieve the goal, it's not a miracle, right? You had an expectation of achieving the goal. Miracles are the unexpected, right? Just almost by definition.
That's an amazing, that's actually a really powerful reframe. So so let me ask you this: in your own life, just by saying yes to more things, how has that fruitfully shown up? Give me an example of how, or a story of how just the power of saying yes has led you to something that you didn't expect you were going to have.
Sure. So it was at a Maverick event, right? And we're literally, watching Brian Smith, founder of Uggs, talk. And he talks about when he had the idea for Uggs, he had these, it was like his goosebump moment. He had his goosebumps. He knew it was going to be this big thing. And I remember in that moment, I could feel like, when you can feel like someone's like staring at you, right? And so I could feel like someone's looking at me. I look over, and Tracy, who's fellow Maverick, is looking at me. I was like, oh, didn't think anything of it. So afterwards, she's like, she had a goosebump moment. And she's like, we have these active workstations at our office, and it's done amazing for my company. I want to get this out into all offices, but obviously I am not an expert in the human body. You are. Let's join forces. Let's see what comes out of this, and how can we get this into the world? And I said yes that night over shots, right? And now flash forward 2 years later, we have an amazing team with some, and literally one of the team members we brought on board was a roommate from another Maverick event, like almost 3 years ago. And we're literally building something that's going to change how people work in the future. Like, you're literally going to be more healthy while you're working on your computer. So that's a great example of just saying yes over shots at a bar. There's no operating agreement, like let's discuss percentages, none of that. It was just like, let's do this. And then we went forward with it.
How do you cultivate the trust to say yes more often?
Yeah. So part of the detach from outcome, right? Because, just think that's like saying detach from success, right? And so the world operates in dichotomies. It's like a pendulum that swings both ways, right? Everything has opposites. And so what I'm saying, from when you practice detachment from success, you ideally would also practice detachment from failure. Right? And so when you're detached from the failure, then it doesn't matter. You just say yes, right? Ultimately, whether it works out or not, if you're detached from the outcome, the success of it, you're also detached from the failure. You practice one and the same.
So how do you, let's say you have, but okay, let me ask you this. So let's say, I have shiny object syndrome. So if I take my blinders off, there's a part of me that wants to say yes to everything, right? There's a part of me that notices so many beautiful things, that so many amazing relationships, but I know that, I have to stay focused. Otherwise I won't so how do you balance the two? Balance saying yes with staying focused.
Yep. So these days I run it through. So from saying enough yeses, like in the beginning, it is like, just think about it. The first time, it could be first time you work out. It could be first time you're running your business, right? You have your hands in everything, right? And you're trying all kinds of different stuff, but eventually you kind of figure out like what works for you, right? And then you become like, you find your unique genius, right? And so this is the process of saying yes. If you have never done it in the beginning, you're going to say yes to everything just to feel it out, right? You're going to feel out. It's like practicing, and some things are going to work out and some things aren't going to work out. But as you practice that, you're going to, by saying yes to enough stuff, you get all this data coming into your brain and your soul universe that starts to formulate a pattern. And that pattern essentially can be, you want to call it your passion, your purpose, all that stuff, right? And then once you have that passion purpose now defined from saying yes enough, you have enough data, then you run everything through that filter. Like for me these days, for me to say yes to a project, I run it through a filter. Is this, when the success of this comes, is this in any way contributing to my vision of helping 1 billion people? And if it's a no, then I say no to it. But this wasn't always like this, right? This is just, recently.
So how was it before? Give me the before.
Just say yes to everything. In the beginning, I just said yes to everything. And, obviously some things didn't work out. Someone approached me about doing like this event to help girls not tear their ACL, like their knee injuries. I said yes. We invested $100,000. We lost $100,000. Like not everything works out, right? But from saying yes enough over the last, decades, you start to, it's almost like if you don't have that much data. You got to go see the world to figure out like where you want to go.
Yep.
If you're too protected, then you don't have the data to be like, oh, I want to go in this direction. So saying yes is like just, you're feeling everything out.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. Now, if I wanted to fast track my journey, right? Just from your own experience, from what you've lived over the past several years, saying yes so many times and building your filter so clear, if I wanted to fast track my journey to really get there, let's say twice as fast or 3 times as fast, how would you go about doing it all over again?
Yep. Well, so many levels of answers. I would say, the generic answer, maybe the PC answer would be, you meditate, right? And so meditating is kind of like taking all that data that just happened, whether it be that day, that week, that month, and, and see, it's almost like, filing, like if your desk is, a bunch of paperwork and each day you add some paperwork. Meditation is kind of like, all right, let's file it here and file it there and organize. And then when we have a neat desk, you go, oh yeah, I can be so much more productive and see and have a clear idea. So for sure, a daily meditation practice is huge. Also, just because of the fact that we live under, delusions, right? Like we have cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias always happening to our brain, meaning, we have beliefs that sometimes we don't even realize we have. And then our brain only see things to support those beliefs. And then if we see things that don't support it, our brain just makes up a lie to discredit it, right? It's all designed to protect our sanity. So recognizing that, to fast track, you can always have develop a tribe of people that you trust and have them, because they'll be able to see your true beliefs and true things that you're hidden. And so having a network, a tribe of people that you trust and having regular meetings with them where you just talk about life and talk about business and everything, they'll be able to give you input that your brain just isn't seeing because of the cognitive dissonance and the confirmation bias. That's another tip. And then so one of the ones out there is, I guess you could go to South America and do some plant medicines. You go there. Yeah. For sure, that is going to fast track as well. So those would be my three tips.
That's good. And I love that because they're essentially tips. So meditation is almost like isolation. and then getting a tribe or friends or mentors or whatever person you can bounce off of is community. So it's almost like you're balancing this self-care. Like self-care is combined into bringing people into your life as well as taking people away from you. So how do you define self-care? Like in 2018 today, what is self-care to you? And how is it practiced efficiently for individuals on a daily basis?
Sure. Essentially, self-care, I would say, is any intention, prioritizing of the self, right? And so, for all the people who did the supplements, one of the questions I asked everyone in this survey is, let's just rank, family, self, business, relationships, let's rank that. Right. And I wanted to see insight as to how people are prioritizing their self relative to other aspects of life. So to me, anytime that you have an intention of self above something else, that is self-care. Right. And so just super broad and simple that way. And so part of implementing that in a way that doesn't hinder, I have to go to the gym, or, I have to go get a massage, or, I have to do this. And we're thinking we're taught at a young age to segment and structure and label everything. We have to, right? Because we don't have the wisdom yet to see the world as is. So we have to be this is work time. This is family time. This is self-care time. This is my workout time. This is my vacation time. So we segment everything. So I'm just using time as an example. But as we get older, right, that operating system may not be the most serving. We now have the wisdom to take away some of the labels. And what's magical about that is, just imagine, let's say you're working right on the computer, and you decide to sit in a half squat position for a minute at a time, and you just do that 10 times a day. Well, you're technically self-caring. You're putting some tension into your muscles, which is extremely healthy. You're working out basically while you're also working on the computer. So to me, how you implement it is you start to get rid of the labels and you overlap your activities. You're not multitasking, you're overlapping this whole grand thing I just call life. You just take out the labels, right? It's you just ask yourself a question how do I get my productivity in today in a way that is serving of my health and my happiness? And then the answer will come, and you'll figure out how do I do that?
That's a brilliant filter. I actually really love that, because if you start asking everything with that, I found that even in my diet, I found that when I ask myself something about is this going to make me happier later, or is this going to, or something along those lines, I tend to make better decisions. If you had to give someone a set of questions they can ask themselves to challenge a lot of the existing relationships that they have with the habits they've built, what would those be?
Great question. Yeah. So, this is a great, tie into I believe that, if you look at the research, right, so the 5 root causes of all diseases, one of them is stress, right? So this is a big one. And so I'm a huge fan of asking a question of what's the relationship with stress that I can put in place that, again, allows me to do all the things I want in life, but also is serving of my relationships, my health, my happiness, right? Because remember, stress, just like water, just like cheesecake, is not good or bad, right? Because stress is necessary. If you actually lived a life of, people talk about I want to reduce my stress, or I have no stress, or life with no stress. If you actually lived a life of zero stress, your resilience, your cells would adapt to no stress, and your resilience would decrease. You would actually die easier. Right? And think about it. A workout is a stressor. If you go and run, right, you're taxing your body. It's a physical stressor, and then your body adapts to that stress, right? So running is healthy, right? If you go and run 2 miles, if you're used to, let's say, run 2 miles, 2 miles is healthy. But if you're used to running 2 miles and you run 20 miles the next day, and then 20 miles again and 20 miles again, that's too much stress. Right? So stress innately is not good or bad. It's excessive high levels of it, and our relationship with that then develops a unhealthy process. And so that question of what relationship, everything we have has to do with the relationship of that thing. So what's a relationship with stress that I can put in place that allows me to, get my things done that I want to do, that is serving of my health, relationships, and happiness, right? And you can literally just repeat that process. What's a relationship with food, right, that I can put in place that also serves and you can literally just like substitute, it's like the one master frame template and just like substitute relationship. So it could be stress, it could be food, it could be anything. You just run it through that filter. And I feel like our brains have infinite wisdom, and it's just the power is in the question.
I love that. The power is in the question. Let's dive deeper, because this relationship concept is something that's what I actually was most impressed about when I heard you speak, was the relationship between food and me actually enjoying the food. Like, I didn't think what you had explained, and I'd love for you to dive deeper in this because I think it's really powerful. The relationship, if I like a certain type of food, it's not necessarily that I like the food. I like what that food represents. Can you dive deeper into that, just to give some of the listeners some context? Because I think there's a really powerful lesson there.
Yeah, I think, most people who have any previous experience or attempts in changing their food, also known as dieting, right? Yeah. Because they're basically trying to change their food intake to then have a certain level of health, or to most typically look a certain way. And so while the mass media and most of the people are saying, they're looking at the tactical stuff, which is what foods to eat, right? Is it keto? Is it paleo? Is it high carbs, low carbs? Is it sugar, not sugar? All the tactical stuff. But ultimately, it's our relationship, right? Our relationship with food then dictates our food choices. It dictates everything. And so just being clear on what is your current relationship with food. And a lot of people don't even know this, because there's not that I'm aware of, like mass media, very popular programs that says, let's figure out what are your emotions as it relates to broccoli. What are your emotions as it relates to cheeseburger and cheesecake, right? And so I feel like that for so many things is where the root cause is, right? They're trying to treat the symptoms. The symptoms is you might be eating too much cheesecake, and they're going to say, don't eat cheesecake, eat paleo instead. But ultimately the root thing is, well, what's the relationship? What is cheesecake giving me? And so a lot of times from talking to people, it's very common that people will feel discomfort, and that discomfort typically at night, it could be, I call it the superficial answer could be boredom. And then the deeper answer could be loneliness, sadness, anxiety, these relationships with these emotions. And then the cheesecake or cheeseburger helps them feel better, right? When they eat it, they get this temporary, like, oh, I feel better. But then typically, because they've judged that food as being bad, then after they feel better, they feel guilt from eating those foods. And that's the cycle, right? And people are stuck in that emotional relationship cycle, and it perpetuates. And so most people are saying solve it by not eating cheeseburger and cheesecake and eat, again, these foods. I'm a huge fan of, well, let's just look at the relationship. Let's work on the emotions as it relates to these foods, because how we do anything is how we do everything, right? And so I'm sure that their relationship with food and how they're using food, I guarantee you, if we talk to them deeply, they're doing the same thing with people. They're doing the same thing with work. Right? It will show up in other areas of life. It's all really has to do with the relationships.
So I want to go back to the concept of, you said goal setting and then the peripheral, and bring that back to self-care. So let's say I know that cheeseburgers are bad for me, but I know that eating this cheeseburger might make me happy. How do you balance self-care? Like, how do you know, like is there a lens you can look at different things, whether it be exercise or like hanging out with friends, or just any experience through a lens of, because I feel like I'm smart enough to trick myself into thinking that, hey, this is really good for me.
Sure.
And so, like, how do you manage that dialogue to where it's actually productive and not necessarily feel like you're missing out, or that you're not experiencing every spectrum of life?
Yep. Yeah. So I'll give you a little example. Like, if I said, hey, Raj, if you go and murder that person, you would make $1 billion, right? I guarantee you're probably like, that's crazy. I'm not going to go kill anyone, right? Because it violates your core values, right? And so the core values ultimately will govern a lot of stuff downstream. And so I tell it, well, what are the core values we can put in place when it comes to food that won't allow you to violate some things, right? And so 3 simple core values. Like, one is 80-20. 80% of the time, if you eat healthy foods, the other 20%, it doesn't matter. It truly doesn't matter, right? And some people ask, well, how to define healthy? To me, it's not calories, it's not sugars or fats, it's anything that hasn't been through a machine, right? Because typically, if it's been through a machine, especially in America, unfortunately, it most likely has been contaminated with chemicals, right? So anything that doesn't have an ingredients list, basically, right, hasn't been through a machine, hasn't been packaged. If you eat that stuff 80% of the time, the other 20%, go have your cheeseburgers and cheesecakes fried in lard, dripped with sugar. It really doesn't matter, right? And so that's one core value. The other one is eat the rainbow. Just like eat different colorful foods, because unless you love cancer, you're going to want to do this because the colorful foods have all the anti-cancer, anti-disease nutrients in it. And then lastly is don't judge food. Just like don't judge humans, because as soon as you judge a food as being bad or good, it starts to play with your psychology, where if you eat, if you say, cheeseburgers are bad, and at some point you're going to eat a cheeseburger, that is followed by guilt, 100%, right? Unless your moral values are twisted. We're like, I love doing bad stuff. That's not the moral value of most people, right? And so, because for most people, they feel like I'm a good human. And so when you do something bad, you're going to be followed by regret and guilt and all that stuff. And so ultimately, if you just allow yourself the emotional space to recognize there'll be times that you're not going to eat super healthy, and that's okay. It's huge.
How do you celebrate life?
How do I celebrate life? That's a great question. I feel like in the small moments as well. So just everything in my life, I practice dichotomies. I practice the pendulum swing. Right. And so, because to me, that's life. Most people say, oh, you got to be positive, right, and avoid the negative, or be this and not this. That's just absurd to me. To me, it's like everything swings. You're not going to avoid the laws of the universe. Everything has cycles, right? And so to me, celebrating life could be, it could be like a big trip with the Mavericks or with my family, but it also could be like, I remember I was in Baltimore, maybe a month ago, and just looking at this amazing tree. It was like you're like in awe of the beauty of this tree. So in the little moments, right? So there's celebrating life, in the big experiences as well as the little moments, and just kind of practicing both ends of the spectrum.
Why do you think both of them have a role to play in your overall happiness?
Yeah, because what the beauty of the little things is they're available every day, right? Like it doesn't matter what your income level is, your social status, your location geographically. Those little things are in front of you all the time. The beauty of that is unlimited resources of those little moments of wow. But obviously, celebrating the big things is also pretty awesome, right? And that's the opposite, which is getting together with a bunch of friends, going to some pretty cool places. But if it's only one or the other, to me, that's the imbalance. I feel like everything, if you can just practice the spectrum of things. Right. Like to me, like I don't believe, like some people say, oh, fear is a negative emotion. And I was like, well, I don't know, if a tiger's running at you, fear is probably useful. Like you run, I'm going to be zen because next moment you might be dead.
Yeah.
Right. So everything has its use. And so to me, you just embrace everything in the spectrum of everything.
How do you embrace fear? Because that's something I've consistently been trying to explore personally in my own life. The way it shows up and manifesting it and trying to add a label or a face to the shadow, it seems like that. So how do you manage your relationship with fear? Mm-hmm. Like that particular emotion?
Yeah. So fear, like all emotions, right, in moments has its use, but in excess, it doesn't. Even happiness, you would think like, morning. So even happiness, if you think about, there's all things like, oh, you got to be happy. Like imagine like everyone in your family just died in a plane crash. Are you supposed to be happy? No, right? Like anyone that saw, what was the movie that was animated where sadness was necessary to interpret?
Yeah. The Inside Out.
Yes, Inside Out, right? So fear has its use. However, prolonged fear, repeated cycles of it is not useful, right? And so how I manage a relationship is if it does show up repeatedly, I will meditate or at least journal or just think about what about this pattern or these situations is repeating this fear, and sitting with where is that fear coming from and how do you transform that fear into something else over time. And once you it's all about the transformation. Once you transform it, then the pattern stops basically, right? And so that transformation, typically the path of that transformation comes from understanding and empathy typically.
What does your fear usually transform into?
Yeah. So for sure, probably the last time I felt like fear was like, when I committed to 1 billion people in that moment, there was like, oh my God, that's like right? In the first moment, like, how am I going to do this? Right. And so there's all this fear of like, I may not have the resources. I may not be able to do it. So all this doubt and fear comes in. And so how I transformed it, just kind of sat and just thought, again, I anchored it back to an experience where I literally saw people get together and put together a plan that will affect 3 billion people. And I was done 3 hours, so 12 hours of planning, right? Was able to affect 3 billion people, right? And so I was like, oh, well, if that could happen, then, me with years to come, that was like a 3-year goal, right? And so with me for 20, 30, 40 years, 1 billion, probably not that improbable. And I thought about like, what are my networks? What's my community? I was like, oh, I have some people with some pretty amazing network and capabilities that I could partner with and co-create with. So just kind of thought it through. And I was like, oh, it's actually pretty doable. And if it's a fear, like, I had a coworker earlier who we just committed to like a team Spartan race, right? And she's like, oh man, I'm afraid, like, because we want to do it at Citizens Bank Park in Philadelphia. She's like, oh, I'm afraid to run the bleachers. What if I fall? I was like, well, let's think this through. How far would you fall if you missed a step? 2 feet, 3 feet? You're not going to die. You might sprain something, you might break something, but luckily you're here. Like, we're pretty good healers. Like, we could heal that. So we thought through like worst case scenario. She realized, she's like, oh yeah, it's not that bad. Right? So I was able to just transform that fear once you face it and you step into it, and it typically would transform into something else, some type of understanding, some kind of aha.
I think the understanding is a key word, because I don't think it ever goes away. Like, I imagine the fear of helping 1 billion people comes back just in a different form, from a different angle, from one conversation with somebody who just reminds you of what you promised the world. Like, I don't think it comes away, but understanding it. So how many different times have you seen the same fear show up in your life? And how many different transformations has that turned into?
Yeah, that's such a good question. For sure. Especially in the beginning, right? When you first commit to that, it will show up in terms of the different resources or different potential obstacles start to show up. You're like, again, do I have enough time to do this? Do I have enough money and funding? Do I have enough of a network? I mean, so every time, right, when one of those things come up, there's a little bit of fear that's brought out. But then interestingly, through every one of those obstacles, it's like our vision here is to help people like see obstacles as opportunities. So my brain just kind of defaults to, well, what's the opportunity in that? Because every obstacle is an opportunity, right? Like, that's, as entrepreneurs, that's our thing. Like, there's an obstacle in a lack of like amazing fresh coffee, and then boom, right? So every obstacle is an opportunity. So I just go to that. Right? So that's the obstacle that's creating the fear, how to just transform that obstacle into an opportunity. And then once you think through that, then the fear goes away because it's an opportunity now.
Well, how do you remind yourself of that opportunity? Because, like, it's in the moment, it's really, like, at least I'm speaking personally, like for me, it's like when I overcome it immediately, I get pumped and I'm excited. But then, that emotion doesn't necessarily last. And I wish I could bottle it and take it with me. So I guess I'm asking you, how do you bottle that?
It's, I'm sure, it's unconscious mastery over time. Right? Just got to be patient, because in the beginning, it is this mental, logical, high effort process. But like anything, after you do it like 100,000 times, it is just a unconscious, it's like built in. It's fully integrated and almost effortless. Right. And so I would say to you in the audience, everyone, is just, there's no rush. Trust me, humans are going to live a lot longer than we think in the future. Right. Then I always remind myself of that. Like, loving your way to 150, I'm going to live at least to 150. There's a lot of time. And so give yourself the time and the space and patience to recognize that many of these things, if you're just starting on that journey, enjoy the journey. It's going to be a long journey, right? Mastery of certain things does take time. And so that allows you already, that permission allows you to not be like, okay, because so much stuff out there is saying you need to be ahead, you need to be here. And that adds to this fear and stress, as if as just like you're behind on a race. There's no one racing you, right? It's your life. There's no clone of you, or like God isn't right here. The universe isn't saying, you know what, you're behind. You need to catch up. That doesn't exist. It's all in our head. And so I think giving yourself the space and permission to kind of take your time on certain things helps you kind of see and practice this without the anxiety and stress and fear.
Where do you think, besides society, but where do you think that intrinsic need to go faster comes from?
Yeah, so it's interesting. As a scientist, it is possible that in our biological makeup, or you can argue that in our biological makeup, the need to progress may be encoded and built in. That's a possibility, right? But for sure, through, just think, when we grew up, like most people, when you were young, and let's say, you got a B on your report card, it wasn't like your parents said, you know what, next time, can you make sure you shoot for a C because B's too much, right? They're going to be like, you know what, great job, but you know what, I think you can do a B plus. I think you can do an A. And so from a very young age, from our parents, from mass media, like every commercial basically says you can be more and do more. And so there's a lot of programming into our subconscious that does perpetuate. And it's not a good and bad thing. It's like you recognize that you live in a matrix and know that game, right? And so just kind of, so you're able to, from the outside looking in, understand where this innate drive is. It could be biological, but for sure it is influenced by, society and media.
So that's why it's so important to have the right media and the right society and the right people in your life, because those are the ones that are going to challenge what you say.
For sure.
I love it. I love it. Steve, you are like, God, man, you're like one of my favorite people in the world. I just love listening to you speak. You make me happy. If I wanted to, or if anyone in the audience wanted to get involved in your world, learn more about these building blocks that you're helping people develop for themselves, how do they get involved? How do we support you? How do we be a part of this mission that you're building?
Yeah. So really the best way would be my personal blog page, is just drsteveyoung.com, right? So you just kind of get a hold of me there. It is me. It's like I actually personally answer questions through that website. So yeah, that would be the best point. And I would love to just, connect with anyone, anything to do with like health, mindset, healing, even parenting, future, living longer, any of those topics, love to discuss.
I love that. And I imagine a few people will be in touch. Steve, I have a closing question that I love to ask everybody, if I haven't asked you enough questions already.
I love them all.
But this closing question, in the midst of your life, from where you were to where you've come now, to the many times that your mission has grown and evolved, how do you stay grounded every single day?
Yeah. So how do I stay grounded? I feel like a little super short version. So when I first came to America, single parent, my mom, my brother, and I, we literally pick furniture from the trash. I thought it was the greatest country. It was like this free furniture. People put out free furniture. And our first place of living had no bathroom, no kitchen. It was just like a room with a bed. We literally had to use, it was a trailer park. So we had to use another trailer to use their bathroom and stuff. And so, but when you're young, I was 8 at the time, you didn't know better. That was life. And so those memories, definitely helped me stay grounded and appreciate every little thing. Yeah. And so just growing up with that experience, there's such great experience from that, I don't even frame it as adversity. Some people would, but just growing up with very little helps you appreciate every little thing.
Do you think that is largely why you feel so called to help people?
For sure. Seeing my mom work so hard in her life, I'm not sure at what age, but pretty young, I would say 10, 11, 12, this belief was embedded, which is I felt like my mom literally sacrificed her life for my brother and I to make it in America. And at that age, I just kind of knew it'd be a waste if I didn't make something meaningful of my life. I feel like I'd be wasting 2 lives. And so that belief was instilled, and that definitely is the main driver.
I love that. Steve, you are an incredible human being. I'm so grateful that you came on and just shared everything with such an open heart. So I just want to acknowledge you for showing up the way you do and just for everything you do for people, including me. So everybody, that is a wrap though for this episode of the Stay Grounded podcast. We'll have all of Steve's contact info and his show notes available to all of you. So don't fret if you missed anything. But obviously this is recorded, so you can go back and listen to it anyways. But yeah, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. So from me, Raj, and your friend Steve, until next time, stay grounded. Thanks for joining us today on this episode of the Stay Grounded podcast, brought to you by Java Press Coffee Company. My name is Raj, and I hope you found this interview helpful as you create your own ways to make daily happiness a priority. If you're interested in learning more about how your morning coffee can turn into a consistent source of joy in your life, visit www.javapress.com to learn how our products can help you do that, and use the coupon code PODCAST for 10% off your purchase. Again, thanks so much for joining us. Stay grounded.